This is a interesting choice for glassware. What happens if you okay, nope. Never mind. Hey everyone, how's it going? These particular tutorials are designed in a way to teach you as much information as possible in the shortest amount of time. So I advise you to watch the whole video before attempting to follow along. Alright, GameMaker Studio 2 as fast as possible, part 1, the basics. Let's go. When you open up GameMaker Studio 2, you are greeted with the options to create a new project, open an existing one, or import the project made in GameMaker Studio 1.4. You also get access to a great archive of learning resources, marketplace, where you can purchase community-made add-ons, extensions, and assets, as well as demo projects showcasing some of the engine's capabilities. When creating a new project, you have a choice between drag and drop and GameMaker language project. Drag and drop is great for kids and folks learning about game dev for the first time. Everyone else should be using the GameMaker language option. When we create a new project, you are greeted by a blank workspace and a resource tree, which is a place where all your game assets and content will be stored. The resource tree consists of sprites, which are graphical assets like character animations, object images, and backgrounds, tiles, which are brushes which allow you to easily design levels by painting content like ground, grass, water, and anything else by automatically placing related tile pieces, sounds for sound effects and music, paths, which are predetermined paths along which objects and characters can move, and this could also be used as a nifty animating tool. Scripts, which are made for writing pieces of code which many different objects could share and use without you having to write the code multiple times for every single object. Shaders are for creating 2D, 3D, and full screen shader effects that utilize your graphics card processing power instead of using your CPU. Fonts are for including custom-made, purchased, or downloaded fonts for your game to use instead of the generic included ones. Timelines for triggering any sort of events over a period of time instead of all at once. For example, as soon as the player walks into a level, you want 5 sequential explosions to happen in that level. This is what you would use. However, this is only one of several ways to achieve this, and it's mainly present here for the users who are using drag and drop method of programming games instead of using GameMaker language. Objects are the core of any GameMaker game. Everything your game has and does will be made out of objects. Anything you use, interact with, fight and control, anything that must follow instructions, make calculations, or behave logically is made out of objects. Rooms are your game levels. This is where you use all the assets you've created to design your game levels. Notes are a small text editor for making comments and remarks about your project, very useful for things like bug tracking and to-do lists. Included files are for using other file types which do not fit into any other resource category, especially useful for storing player information and game data, which needs to be loaded upon the game's start. I like to use this for storing more complex data of my level design, such as data for a complex lighting system. Options are for platform-specific settings such as basic information about your game, game icon and splash screen that you see before the game starts, as well as some basic graphical settings like making the game full screen, borderless window, allowing users to resize the window, and hiding the cursor, as well as other useful parameters. It is worth noting that many of these parameters can be set using code, which comes useful for larger and more complex games. And finally, configurations, a way of making multiple versions of a game without creating multiple projects. For example, an Android game with ads and one without ads, or having some unique content in a PS4 version of a game that you don't get with an Xbox version. You can create almost every one of these resources by right-clicking on the resource category and choosing Create. You can also add an existing one you've downloaded or saved from another project. The resource tree allows you to zoom in and out to see more resources, as well as create custom views, which is useful if you have hundreds upon hundreds of various assets to go through, and you'd like to only view a specific one. For example, only show enemy assets, or only show collectible objects. The Recent Windows tab below the resource tree helps with jumping between several recent windows when you're moving stuff like code or variables around. It is also worth noting that the colors of the resource tree can be changed by going to the File, Preferences, Resource tab, where you can change the color, text, and size of each resource tree category for better differentiation. This helps with finding a way around the resource tree containing a plethora of various resources. Once the game gets big, it's easy to get lost in there, so this helps. Also, if you're working on a small monitor or on a really big monitor running a super giant resolution, you can also change the DPI of the interface, allowing you to scale the user interface to see better or see more in the same screen space. This setting is applied after restarting GameMaker Studio. GameMaker now uses workspaces for organizing windows and panels. You can create and rename a workspace with a slow double mouse click or by pressing F2. Workspaces allow you to set up different environments for developing your game. For example, one workspace for working with sprites and tiles, and another for programming objects. You can also pop off a workspace and move it around, which is useful for a multi-monitor setup. At any point in time, you can press Ctrl-T, which will open up a quick search menu. There you can type in the name of a resource and it will either find that resource if it's already open, or it will open that resource in the workspace you are currently in. All of the tabs in GameMaker Studio can be moved around and rearranged to your liking, but make sure to save the layout if you've changed it from the default one by using the Layouts Save Layouts option. You can load the layouts later on in a new or existing project. Now, besides the room resource, all other resources open up in a small window. The room resource, however, opens up in its own workspace tab, so because of that, we're going to be including it in this video. The room editor consists of the main canvas and the sidebar containing tabs of layers, layer properties, and room properties. The Layers section is one of the biggest additions to GameMaker Studio 2, since now you can rearrange which objects, sprites, and tiles are drawn on top of one another by rearranging the order of layers that they are contained in. The topmost layers are respectively rendered above the bottom layers. You can add multiple layers for backgrounds, tiles, assets, and instances based on your preference. Several layers are useful not just for organizing, but also manipulating groups of objects and sprites and tiles by controlling the layer itself via code. The layer properties will offer different options depending on which layer type you have selected above. With Asset and Instance layer, it allows you to locate objects and sprites on a currently selected layer. Should your level be overcrowded with various items and objects, making it difficult to select what you need, you can locate it in the list and select it that way. With Backgrounds and Tiles, the tab will give you the options of which sprite you'd like to use for either an overall background image or the tile set containing your tiled brushes to paint your level design. With path layers, you get the option of selecting or creating a new path asset and paint predetermined paths directly on top of your level, along which you can set an object to move. With these layers, you have the ability to either set the resources you'd like to use via the drop-down menu, or you can respectively drag and drop them into the window or the canvas itself. The Properties tab presents you with the parameters pertaining to this room itself. Persistent option makes sure that when the game is running and you as a player leave and come back to this level, everything in it remains the same as when you left it. When unchecked, the rooms reset themselves to an initially designed state every time you leave and return, as if it's the first time you've entered this level. You can also set the width and the height of the level using these respective options. Creation code is a useful tool if you need to execute some code right at the start of the level. This is the first code that is executed in this room. Instance Creation Order is a tool designed to check and reorganize which order your objects are created in. For example, if you have a player character which, as soon as it's created, counts how many chests there are in this room, it is a good idea to make sure that these chests are spawned before the player. Otherwise, if the player object spawns first, it can't count the objects that do not exist yet. Viewports are options for your cameras. This is another improvement of GameMaker Studio 2. By default, your game will display the entire room in the game window. And the size of the game window will be based on the size of the first room in your game. This may work if your entire game consists of a single room, but should you want to move your player to the next room and it's not the exact same size as the previous one, the game will stretch the view in order to fill the window, which will result in the game view being squashed. This is where viewports come in. You get access to 7 viewports and you can think of them as cameras. For example, say you're making a game where you can control 5 different characters located in different locations of the level. You can enable 5 viewports and set each one to follow a different character, while switching between which one gets to be displayed to the player. This tool can also be used to create split-screen games where each viewport occupies a portion of the game window and allows you to display different parts of the level on one screen. Each viewport grants you the settings of an in-game virtual camera, as well as the settings of the game window. You can set which object this view must follow, which can be either a player, enemy, projectile, or a dedicated camera object, as well as the border properties, which determines how far a tracked object needs to be from the edge of the view in order for the camera to start following it. Again, it is worth noting that all these properties can be set via code and that these options are really given for the drag and drop project users. Last but not least, we have the level canvas. This is where you place all your game assets to create levels. The middle mouse button is used to move around, something you can also achieve with the scroll wheel in conjunction with the shift key, as well as the control key for zooming in and out. At the top right corner, you get the basic controls like grid size, color and visibility properties of the grid, zoom controls, homing controls, which are especially useful if you manage to accidentally throw yourself in the middle of butt nowhere, something that has happened to me on many occasions, either due to my error or GameMaker opening the room awkwardly. Pressing the homing button will promptly center the room in your view. We also have a play and stop buttons, which will force the sprites that contain an animation to play inside the room editor without having to compile and launch the game to see how it looks. This works in both sprite and objects, as long as the object has the sprite set in its object editor. Lastly, we have the global select option, which will allow you to select any object or sprite placed on the canvas, regardless of which layer it is located on. Useful when you have 50 instance layers and you don't want to click through each and every one in order to find the object you're looking for, because remember, you can only select a resource if you have its layer selected. This helps to circumvent that. Object and sprite assets give you additional quick edit options on a per instance basis when double-clicking on that asset in the canvas view. And remember that you can also do this from within the Layer Properties tab. Very useful. And finally, we have the various information tabs located at the bottom of GameMaker Studio 2. This section contains the Output tab, which contains the compiled data with the information about what processes and resources take place when GameMaker Studio is building your game. Search results for listing every occurrence of your search query. For example, if you're trying to find out which objects you've used a certain variable in by using the Search and Replace tool, this is where the results would show up. Source control displays the reports and project file synchronization when you enable the option to store your project in places like GitHub, which allows you to work with multiple developers on one project all at once. Breakpoints is one of the useful debugging options, which allows you to place a marker on a certain line of code so that GameMaker halts the entire program at that precise point without crashing it. This is useful for getting the precise line of code where a bug or an error occurs when you haven't been able to find it by looking at the code. This is useful for the more obscure errors. Compile errors and syntax errors tabs will display whatever coding errors you might have missed either before or after your game has been compiled. Some errors are obvious and can be tracked with a syntax checker before compiling, while others may occur when certain conditions have been met and you haven't accounted for them, thus causing the error while the game is running. Alright, this pretty much brings you up to speed with the basics of GameMaker Studio 2 environment. These tutorials are here to make you aware of the tools, options, and commands you have at your disposal so that when you get into game development, you're not in complete darkness, not knowing where to start. Consider supporting me on Patreon for just $1 a month. It truly helps me out with producing this type of content. And also, I'm currently working on a premium grade game development course in C++, which covers every aspect of producing a game, including subjects like writing music and recording and treatment of voiceovers of characters for your game. These are subjects you don't hear about very often. Head on over to the assetbase.eisenstadtstudio.com and pre-order the course today. Once the course goes live, you will get a lifetime access for hundreds of hours of production level content, as well as the game itself and a polished presentation series going over the code line by line, explaining everything along the way. Well, alright, this has been a fantastic video to work on. I will see you in another video where I shall be explaining how to make a top-down shooter as fast as possible. Adios.